Collins glanced at her dashboard clock, her heart sinking as the digits flashed. 9:10 a.m. She had never been late to court, not once in her entire career as a federal prosecutor. But today, a last-minute crisis in one of the biggest human trafficking cases in Georgia's history had left her scrambling. As she stepped out of her sleek Mercedes in the municipal courthouse parking lot, her mind was already calculating the next move. Her usual composure was shaken but not broken. Welcome to American Life Stories, where we uncover the extraordinary moments that define us. Today's story, a parking ticket, or so it seemed. The day had started like any other. An early alarm, a neat navy blazer over a white blouse, and a cup of fresh coffee in hand. Sarah's focus was laser-sharp as always. But when her phone buzzed with an urgent call from her boss, interrupting her drive to contest what she believed was a wrongly issued parking citation, her priorities shifted in an instant. The Thompson case, involving dozens of trafficking victims, needed her immediate attention. As she sat parked outside a coffee shop, typing legal analysis on her laptop, Sarah knew she was cutting it close. Still, she believed she could manage it all. She always had. But stepping into Judge William Barrett's courtroom, Sarah felt the tension immediately. His sharp, unforgiving glare pierced through her professional calm as he stopped mid-sentence, redirecting the room's attention to her. "Step forward," he commanded, his tone cold and dismissive. In that moment, Sarah realized this was no ordinary courtroom encounter. What began as a simple dispute over a parking ticket would soon unravel into a powerful confrontation with systemic bias, challenging the very principles of justice she had sworn to uphold. Sarah Collins stood at the courtroom podium, her pulse steady despite Judge Barrett's sharp tone cutting through the air like a blade. The judge leaned forward, his gaze unyielding as he declared, "Do you think your time is more valuable than this court's?" His words were laced with an authority that seemed to demand not just respect but submission. Inside, Sarah's frustration simmered. She had faced hostility before, defense attorneys with hidden agendas, witnesses too afraid to speak the truth, but something about the judge's tone was different. His words weren't just about her tardiness. They were dismissive, belittling, aimed at undermining her before she even had a chance to speak. Taking a slow breath, she reminded herself of who she was. A federal prosecutor, a voice for justice, and someone who never backed down from a fight. "Your Honor, I apologize for being late," she began, her voice measured but firm. "I was delayed due to urgent responsibilities in a federal case." Judge Barrett interrupted, his gavel hovering ominously over the bench. His dismissal wasn't subtle. He was making an example of her, and the room knew it. As murmurs rippled through the courtroom, Sarah noted the subtle shift in the gallery. Curiosity, sympathy, and for some, silent anger. The elderly black bailiff, James Wilson, watched the scene unfold, his jaw tightening. In his 15 years working this courtroom, he had seen this exact scenario play out too many times. He locked eyes with Sarah briefly, his gaze carrying both warning and encouragement. "Stay calm but don't give in." The judge continued, his voice rising in condescension. "This court will not tolerate such blatant disregard for its procedures. Perhaps a fine will remind you of the importance of punctuality." His gavel struck the desk with finality. $500 for contempt. A hush fell over the room. Even the gallery full of strangers shifted uncomfortably. Sarah clenched her fists beneath the podium. The amount wasn't just excessive. It was targeted. She had witnessed this exact judge give leniency to others just that morning. Yet now, in front of everyone, he was using her as a scapegoat. Her mind raced with indignation, but she steadied her voice. "Yes, Your Honor," she replied, each word deliberate. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing her anger. Instead, she reached for her leather briefcase. The air seemed to shift as she opened it, pulling out a sleek credential holder. Its golden Department of Justice seal caught the morning sunlight. "Before this fine is recorded, Your Honor, I must formally introduce myself," she said, her tone firm but respectful. "My name is Sarah Collins. Assistant United States Attorney for the Northern District of Georgia. The reaction was immediate. Judge Barrett froze, his gavel hovering midair. His face paled, and for the first time, he truly looked at her, not as a late defendant but as someone with power and authority. Around the room, whispers broke out, quickly silenced by the weight of the moment. Sarah continued, unyielding. This court appearance was for a personal matter, but I believe the behavior I've witnessed here today warrants further examination. She glanced pointedly at the clerk, who had stopped typing mid-sentence, her discomfort palpable. I observed disparate treatment of defendants based on race and perceived social status. This is not an isolated incident, and I have documented every interaction in this courtroom since my arrival. The judge stammered. Attorney Collins, surely this is unnecessary. If there's been any misunderstanding, he began. It's not a misunderstanding, she interrupted, her voice calm but unrelenting. It's a systemic issue, and as a federal officer of the court, it is my duty to address it. James Wilson, still by the bench, allowed himself the faintest smile. This was the moment he had silently wished for, a reckoning he'd long believed would never come. As Sarah laid out her observations, 7 late arrivals that morning, 3 white professionals ignored, 2 Asian students mildly reprimanded, and 2 black individuals fined excessively, the courtroom buzzed with tension. A young, lost student in the back furiously jotted notes. Her wide eyes reflected the significance of what she was witnessing. Judge Barrett's voice wavered. Perhaps we can discuss this matter privately. No, Your Honor, Sarah replied, standing tall. This discussion belongs here, in the public record. The law demands transparency and fairness. Today we've seen neither. The room was electric, the weight of Sarah's words pressing on everyone present. The young white woman who had also arrived late sat quietly, her face a mix of guilt and apprehension. The elderly black man in the back straightened in his seat, his pride unmistakable. For the first time in decades he felt seen. Judge Barrett, visibly shaken, cleared his throat. I will take your concerns under advisement, and of course the fine is dismissed. Your Honor, Sarah countered, her voice steady, I'll pay the fine. It's not about avoiding the consequences. It's about ensuring that this court, and every court, applies the law equally. As she signed the check, the room remained silent. The gallery held its collective breath. Sarah's actions were more than a defense. They were a challenge, a refusal to allow prejudice to hide behind authority. She handed the check to the clerk, her eyes meeting the judge's one last time. Her gaze seemed to say, this isn't over. And it wasn't. Months after that fateful morning, Sarah Collins sat in her office, gazing at the framed $500 fine receipt on the wall. It wasn't just a reminder of a parking ticket. It symbolized a turning point. Not just for her but for a justice system that too often failed the people it was meant to serve. Across her desk lay stacks of case files and reports from colleagues and community members. Stories of inequality that had been ignored for years. What had started as one woman refusing to stay silent had ignited a ripple effect of change. Judge Barrett had resigned. His courtroom, once a place of power, was now a place for new reforms. Sarah's push for transparency had led to mandatory bias training, independent oversight committees, and changes that reached beyond Atlanta. For the first time, people who had long felt invisible in the justice system were starting to see their voices matter. But for Sarah, the biggest change wasn't in policies. It was in people. The elderly man who had sat in the back of the courtroom that day returned to thank her. You didn't just stand up for yourself, he said, his voice trembling with emotion. You stood up for all of us. As Sarah smiled, she felt the weight of what they had accomplished and the work still ahead. Change, she knew, was never instant, but it was possible when someone dared to challenge the status quo. If this story inspired you, let's continue the journey. Like, share, and help American Life Stories reach 10,000 subscribers. Together, we can shine a light on the moments that spark real change.